Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. I'm just going to give a couple of minutes for people to join and then we'll get started. But feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat as you wait. Good morning, everyone. So welcome and thank you for joining us today for our webinar on single parents and energy affordability. We've got a great lineup for you today of speakers. So we've got delighted to have Molly joining us from Citizens Advice Scotland and Samantha, who runs our advice and information service as well. And do feel free to introduce yourselves, to say hello, where you've come from in the chat. We will be recording today's session, so we've disabled mics and cameras to allow for that as well. If you've got questions as we go, please use the Q&A function that's on there, and we can see those, and feel free to vote for the questions that you want to see answered as well on there, and we'll go through the most popular ones first. So today we're going to hear a range of evidence and experiences of how single parent families are being impacted by energy affordability. As you can see in the slide, we're going to start off by hearing about what we're seeing across our services at One Parent Family Scotland before Molly shares some evidence from Citizens Advice Scotland, and finishing up with the contributions with hearing about lived experience and policy recommendations. There will be plenty of time for question and answer session 2, so just do use the Q&A function as we go to put your questions in and vote for those that you want to see answered as well. For those of you who haven't heard of One Parent Families Scotland before or aren't aware of what we do, I'm just going to start by sharing a little bit about us. So we support single parent families across Scotland through local services, our national lone parent helpline and digital support. Every inquiry helps us understand the issues families are facing, identifying emerging trends, and use this evidence to improve services and set policy priorities. Through our services, we provide holistic support for families. That means we meet them where they're at, and we also campaign for policy changes in Scotland to reduce child poverty and promote equality. So I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker for today's webinar, Samantha Morrison. Samantha manages our National Advice and Information Service, and she's going to share with us today some of the insights of how the cost of energy is impacting parents who contact us. So I'll pass over to Samantha now.
Thanks, Caris. Good morning, everyone. My name's Samantha Morrison. I am the Advice and Information Services Manager at One Parent Family Scotland. Myself and the colleagues that I work with in my team speak to single parents almost daily about a range of different single parenting issues, but particularly energy challenges and fuel poverty. So we're going to start this morning by looking at why energy costs can be particularly challenging for single parent families. So single parent families are often juggling numerous household expenses on a single income. That includes housing, food, childcare, transport and energy, alongside all the other costs that come with raising children. That income for single parents isn't always predictable either. Employment circumstances can change. We know that we've done quite a bit of research recently about child maintenance, and that can be often plagued with challenges as well, can be delayed or stopped. And there can also be issues, delays and changes when it comes to benefit entitlement or receiving those benefits in the first place. It often means that for single parents there is less financial resilience within the household. When energy costs increase, there might simply not be any spare money there available to absorb that cost. Single parents are also recognised as a priority group within Scotland's child poverty framework. However, it's important to recognise that the challenges families face are often interconnected, with one source of financial pressure potentially adding to another. So, for example, a single parent may also be caring for someone within that household with a disability, or be raising 3 or more children within that household. These circumstances can result in greater energy needs, meaning that the family may need to use more energy or face higher household costs. think it's also particularly important to challenge the idea that employment protects people from fuel poverty as well. We know that a lot of single parents do work, but still find themselves struggling to afford energy and other costs. When you're managing childcare, housing and energy on one income, being in employment doesn't necessarily mean that there's enough money left over to absorb rising costs. So when we're thinking about energy and affordability, we need to look at the whole household picture rather than simply asking, can you afford the bills? So what do we mean when we talk about fuel poverty and single parents? So it's not simply, like I said, about being able to afford the energy bill that comes through the door. There's a relationship between several factors such as energy costs, so the typical cost of energy to start with, the household income, the suitability and the condition of the home that someone may live in, and whether the family can maintain an acceptable living standard as well. For a single parent, when one essential bill increases, something else usually has to give elsewhere. So in reality, that might mean spending less on food, delaying other payments, or cutting back on essentials or reducing that energy use. And Scotland presents a particularly complex picture when we look at energy as well. Single parents live in a number of different communities, whether that's urban areas, rural or island communities, and they can often have different heating systems as well, live in older or less energy efficient housing, and have limited access to local advice or support services. We also know that digital inclusion can create barriers, particularly when information, applications and support are increasingly accessed online. From some Scottish Government statistics in 2024, we also know that households relying on electricity as a primary heating source are almost twice as likely to find themselves in fuel poverty as those with access to gas. So again, it just shows us it's not just about household income. It's about the type of home that someone may have and the housing system that's available to them, and this can make a significant difference. It's also important as practitioners we're careful not to make assumptions about how energy difficulties present. Not every single parent household will experience energy difficulties or fuel poverty in the same ways, and some may not even experience this at all. That's why it's so important to make sure that we've got a person-centred approach. We need to understand the family's individual circumstances rather than assuming that certain challenges will be there or will be experienced and can be addressed in the same way. So what do we hear about how single parents cope with fuel poverty and energy difficulties? When families are struggling with energy costs, how do they actually cope? Unfortunately, for many parents, they need to find a way to manage because there is no other option. We regularly hear from parents at our helpline that they may self-disconnect or deliberately switch off their energy supply. Others may choose to partially heat their homes or ration their energy use, perhaps only heating or using energy at particular times of the day, limiting it to one space within the home, or heating it for limited periods. They also may, something that we do hear quite a lot actually, to be honest with you, is that they'll rack up energy debt, and that this is just accepted as a normal way of managing energy, and that's a part of keeping that household functioning. Sometimes other areas of family life take a hit for our single parents. They may have to cut back on food, children's essentials or other household costs just to make sure that the heating stays on. Some families also have to rely on food banks, charitable grants and other emergency supports to free up some income to be able to put something towards the energy bills. And we hear regularly from other parents as well that they look to try and increase work to increase income. But for a single parent family, working more can also cost additional money and add additional pressures, particularly, for example, in regards to childcare or transport costs. At One Parent Family Scotland, we use a framework called My Life in E, which is a holistic framework, and this is really important for supporting our parents. We look at the 6 priority areas of life for single parents, and this was chosen by our single parents about what matters most to them. Energy problems don't sit in isolation within this framework. They affect money through increased debt and bills. They affect their home by showing up in difficulties about keeping that home warm, comfortable and adequately maintained. It affects children when parents have to make difficult choices about heating, food and other essentials for the household. It also affects health and well-being, whether that be living in a cold home or through the financial stress and constant worry about making ends meet. Can also affect work, education and training. Again, if a parent needs to increase their hours to take on additional work and increase that income, or it may also potentially prevent parents from taking up opportunities elsewhere. And it can also affect relationships, because financial pressures can create stress or reliance on certain members of family or relationships that they have in their life. And it can also make it more difficult for people to reach out for help because of the associated shame and stigma. So the key point is that an energy problem quickly becomes a whole family problem. We're not just dealing with a bill, we're potentially looking at the impact that energy costs are having across a whole family. So what can practitioners do to support single parents if this is becoming an issue? I want to leave you with 3 simple actions today. So classed it under ask and understand, check and maximise and refer. So first, ask and understand. Don't necessarily wait for a parent to raise issues about energy. Make that part of an ongoing conversation about their circumstances. Ask about how they're managing their energy costs, whether they're able to heat their home adequately, and what impact those energy costs are having on them and their family. And make sure that we'll listen to what they're actually telling us. Understanding the impact is just as important as identifying the energy problem itself. Secondly, we want to make sure that families are encouraged as much as possible to engage with benefit checks and make sure that they're receiving everything that they're entitled to. We also need to consider different energy-related supports as well, including initiatives such as a warm home discount where that's eligible. Please don't assume that someone's already checked their entitlement or they know what support is available to them. And finally, practitioners don't need to be experts in every aspect of energy support. At OPFS, our advice and information services can support single parents with advice and information around energy, fuel poverty and wider financial pressures. And again, we can give benefit checks and work calculations, a whole variety of support there for single parents. And where debt is part of the problem for single parents, the OPFS National Debt Service can provide specialist debt support and support someone through that entire debt journey. So ultimately, our role as practitioners is to spot the issue, ask the right questions, but crucially understand the impact and maximise the support available and connect families with the right services. Perhaps the most important message to take away today is that energy difficulties aren't just about the energy. For single parents, they affect every aspect of life: money, housing, children, health, work and relationships. By taking time to understand and ask what's happening in a family's life, we can help make sure that energy problems don't go unnoticed and that single parents don't have to face them alone. Thanks very much. And again, please do ask any questions that you need to. I'll be happy to answer them at the end of this the webinar. Thanks.
Thank you, Samantha. That was really insightful from across our services. Really appreciate your input there as well. And just to echo what Samantha said, please do add your questions into the question and answer section, just so we can make sure that we can see them as they come in as well and they don't get lost in the chat. And do vote for the questions that you want us to answer as well. So our next speaker is Molly. We're really grateful to have her join us from Citizens Advice Scotland. Molly is a senior policy officer and she specialises in energy, and she's going to share with us some evidence and insight from across Citizens Advice Scotland. Over to you, Molly.
Thanks very much, Caris. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to start by telling you about a dad who came to his local Citizens Advice Bureau for support, and we can call him Kyle. Kyle had recently taken full custody of his 2 children, and he'd had to reduce his working hours to look after them. The loss of that income meant that he was struggling to stay on top of paying for his essentials. With nearly £3,500 of energy debt on his prepayment meters, part of each top-up was being taken for repayment, with Kyle spending upwards of £200 per month on energy usage and debt. And he was constantly at risk of self-disconnection. Trying to manage this while looking after his kids was taking a significant toll on Kyle. This is just one of the countless stories that we hear week on week from advisors at local Citizens Advice Bureau, the length and breadth of Scotland, from Shetland to the borders. Advisors who provide life-changing advice that's free of charge, free of judgment, and that's tailored to the needs of each person and each family, supporting people in some of the most challenging circumstances. Because what Kyle was facing here is a story that we hear time and again of multiple overlapping pressures, rising food prices, council tax bills increasing, rents rising, with wages stagnant and jobs that don't provide a secure income, precarious and unsafe housing, and a social security system that for so many people just doesn't stretch to meet the essential costs of what they need to get by. The experiences of people supported by our network speak to the wider issues of failing systems in which people are not provided for and protected, but continually let down and harmed. And in the context of multiple systems failures, though, the particular area of focus today is energy. And for Kyle, it was the constant struggle of trying to keep his energy on supply that was a crucial source of that real pressure and hardship. And it's something that our evidence continually shows, with energy-related issues now a key driver of advice demand across our network, having surged over the last few years. So what we can see here is a clear picture of worsening harm as the pandemic hit, immediately followed by a shock to the energy market, which saw surging costs and the need for support skyrocket. But what it also shows, and what our evidence tells us, is that while that first surge in energy costs a few years ago led to that spike in demand for support, that harm of unaffordable energy has not abated. The people that are coming to our network every day, people in the most challenging circumstances, are still struggling in a system that just isn't working. So in 2021, around 1 in 10 people that we advised across the network of Citizens Advice Bureau in Scotland needed support with energy. And last year in 2025, that was 1 in 6. So it's an increase of 60% in just a few short years. And in just the last few months, even, in spite of the widespread heat waves we've been having, our Extra Help Unit, the EHU for short, a brilliant team of specialist caseworkers supporting people across Great Britain with complex and urgent energy issues, handled almost 2,650 cases of people who needed financial support to top up the prepayment meters because they simply couldn't afford to do so. Because what we're seeing is that crisis financial support just to keep people on supply is a huge part of the work that our advisors do. And that's not just in the winter. It's not just in periods of intense cold or when the days are the shortest. It is year round. The most recent spike in energy costs linked to the conflict in Iran is the latest escalation in a seemingly never-ending cost of living crisis. People reliant on heating oil felt those shocks immediately, with costs doubling or even trebling overnight. The energy price cap increased on the 1st of July, and there's further worry for what might come in the months ahead. And crucially, these further shocks, these further intensifications of that hardship come after years of sustained financial pressure, so people just can't absorb them. And whenever there's conversations around rising costs, so often there's questions asked about what people can do themselves to mitigate the effects. But personal action is not a valid solution to systemic issues. The scale and depth of the problem are such that switching tariffs, turning down the thermostat, timing showers are not a solution. People are already doing this and it is not enough. People like Amir. Amir came to his local cab as working on a 0 hours contract had left him struggling. His rent and his council tax were both about to increase, alongside an energy debt of £2,700. Amir doesn't heat his home during the week. He uses a single fan heater when his daughter visits on the weekend. The money's so tight that Amir had actually asked about having his gas meter and supply removed completely just to try and save on the stand-in charges. He said that being unable to afford essentials for him and his daughter, despite having a job, had left him feeling helpless. The onus can't be on individuals to tighten their belts when high costs continually keep a decent, dignified standard of living out of reach for people, so that energy is experienced as a luxury commodity rather than as the essential utility that it is that underpins the functions of all of our lives. Because for thousands across Scotland, even if you've cut your usage, it isn't enough to keep from falling into the red. And the legacy of years of unaffordable costs is energy debt. This is what an advisor told me at a recent meeting. The depth and scale of energy debt that we see across Scotland can be really difficult to comprehend. In just the first 3 months of this year alone, the average energy debt that people brought to cabs was over £2,800 per household, rising to £3,200 in rural areas, a total of £2.7 million that was brought to our network. And you'll hear today from other speakers about how damaging energy debt is for single parent families and how difficult it can be to find any breathing space when you have one income. And we see this across our network too. Last year, single parents accounted for more than 1 in 10 people advised by a CAB. But in the context of energy debt, that figure rose to 1 in 5. So that's 22% of the people who needed energy debt advice being from a single parent household. And the psychological toll of living in debt can't be overstated, especially for those with unavoidable high usage, such as disabled people. Given that reducing costs is not an option, mounting debt is inevitable. And that was the case for Jane. Jane's a full-time carer to her disabled daughter and has essential medical equipment in the home, including a ventilator and an electric wheelchair. Her sole income is via social security, which isn't enough to cover ongoing usage. Jane's electricity debt is over £12,000. A supplier has offered a weekly direct debit of £248 to address this, and that is impossible for Jane to afford. She can't reduce her ongoing costs. The psychological burden of that mounting debt, on top of the pressure of already caring for her daughter, has been profoundly damaging for Jane. I spoke at the start of the session there about the overlapping pressures that keep a decent, dignified standard of living out of reach. And for people in rural areas, these multiple drivers of harm can be amplified by higher energy costs due to being off-grid, with colder weather, and housing with poor energy efficiency. And that was the case for Kirsty. Kirsty was referred to a local CAB for support with high energy bills and energy debt. She lives with her partner and her 2 children in a house in rural northern Scotland with all electric heating and poor insulation. And after living in the home for a year, the family had accrued energy debt of over £2,500, with bills between £300 and £500 per month. And despite this, the home remains cold, with damp and mould on the walls. Although Kirsty set up a repayment plan with the supplier, the high ongoing costs mean that it's just really difficult to bring that debt balance down. Kirsty had recently been diagnosed with a degenerative condition and was struggling to cope with the stress of the situation. Living in drafty, damp and mouldy homes pushes people into ill health and worsens existing conditions, not only impacting people's quality of life, but increasing pressure on strained health services and driving people out of work. Yet when living in poor housing, battling these multiple pressures of the high cost of energy, as well as other essentials, seeking out and navigating schemes to improve the energy efficiency of your home can feel impossible. It's a vicious circle of unaffordable bills, mounting debt, and worsening mental and physical health. At Citizens Advice Scotland, with our evidence and our experience of the issues that people face across Scotland, it's incumbent upon us not just to sound the alarm and to narrate the harm that we see, but to present solutions to improve the lives of the people that we support. So the issues explored today, unaffordable energy costs, inescapable energy debt, and cold, drafty homes, requires bold, ambitious solutions that work in tandem. The UK government and Ofgem must work together to urgently deliver a scheme for comprehensive and accessible debt relief. And long-term, tackling the root cause of energy debt must be anchored in making energy more affordable, as without action on costs, debt will continue to rise. One-off reactive support packages to mitigate the effects of shocks to the energy market are not a substitute for impactful long-term measures to make energy more affordable. We need to see lasting change, like the introduction of a social energy tariff for those on low incomes and those with unavoidable high usage linked to rurality and disability. Any short-term support that the UK government may introduce this winter has to be effectively targeted towards those with the greatest need. The existing energy efficiency and retrofit schemes we have need to be more expansive and better targeted towards those most in need. People have to be met where they are and not have the burden of accessing support with energy efficiency measures placed upon them when the precarity and hardship that they face in their daily lives leaves little capacity for anything other than crisis management. And the scale of these issues is considerable, but there is also a real opportunity here for impactful change with an energy system in transition and changes in governments here and at Westminster. The vast wealth of unique insight that organisations like CAS have into the lived experiences of people have to be drawn upon in the design of the measures that are so desperately needed to create a more just and compassionate society. Because a different system is possible, one where everyone has a safe, warm home and no one second guesses the flick of every switch. Thanks very much for listening.
Thank you, Molly. That was a really powerful presentation that you shared there. So usually at our webinars, we have a separate host and speaker, but today you're stuck with me in a dual role. So our final speaker today is me. I'm Caris. I'm the Head of Policy, Strategy and Communications for One Parent Family Scotland. And I'm delighted to be able to share with you today as well. So I'm just going to get my slides ready and hopefully this will all go smoothly into the next one. Great. So money and debt related issues made up the largest share of inquiries across our services at One Parent Family Scotland between April and June this year. Rising living costs continue to place significant pressures on single parent families, with increasing numbers reaching out for support to meet everyday living costs. This year, energy debt has been one of the most common issues we've seen through our financial inclusion service. Almost all of our debt inquiries have some kind of fuel debt. One of our debt advisors told me, energy arrears seem to be the one debt nobody can avoid. A large amount of the parents we speak to don't have credit cards, loans or overdrafts, as they aren't eligible to obtain this kind of lending. But gas and electricity is a charge from the day they move in, and it only takes a month or two for the debt to build up. Energy debt is one of the reasons that families can be forced onto prepayment meters. And many of the parents we support at One Parent Family Scotland are on prepayment meters. While we've seen changes in recent years that have put an end to the prepayment premium, where customers are on a prepayment meter were charged more than direct debit customers, we still have concerns around the impact of prepayment meters on single parent families. Too often, being on a prepayment meter is forcing families to self-ration and even self-disconnect. This means they're going without essential heat or light as they simply can't afford it. As a single parent myself, I know what it's like to have to manage on a low income while juggling being the sole earner and sole carer in my household. I've been a single parent for over 11 years now, and during that time I've lived in a variety of places, including temporary accommodation, social housing, and now I'm a homeowner. I know all too well the challenges of each of these situations. I've lived on a prepayment meter a number of times over the years for a variety of reasons. At first, I thought it might be a good thing being on a prepayment meter, as I could just pay as I go and have a clear idea of how much I was spending. But I quickly learned many of the energy saving techniques we've seen recommended in recent years, as I could see the real-time impact. And while this was an advantage, smart meters now do the same for us. And my experience of prepayment meters was at a time when they were more expensive. When I was first relying on them, I was a newly single parent on a very tight budget. I felt and experienced the injustice of the system deeply. I thought it would make it easier for me to budget, but it actually made it much harder. Being on a prepayment meter meant I couldn't spread the cost of my energy use. I ended up paying much higher costs in the winter, which put an additional strain on my already often stretched budget. The vast majority of households who rely on prepayment meters are vulnerable or surviving on a low income, which means the inability to spread the cost is hitting those who can least afford it. There are some smart prepayment meters now that can be topped up online for those who have access to do this. However, every prepayment meter I've ever had either had a key or a card, like the one in the picture. The process of topping these up can be frustrating at best, impossible at worst. The process is filled with barriers, many shops only accepting cash, yet having cash machines that charge to take money out, a limit to how much you can top up in one go, also meaning more frequent trips. I felt embarrassed paying for a top up, as eyes were often rolled at the inconvenience, both from the shopkeeper and those waiting behind me in the queue. At times, it felt like I had a big neon sign over my head pointing out my poverty for all to see, especially on the days when I could only afford to top up a very small amount. Often I'd go to a shop further away so that I could avoid bumping into anyone I might know. Living in Glasgow means I never had to go far for a top up. Usually I could find somewhere within walking distance. But for those who live in more rural parts of the country, the journey to find a pay point can be prohibitive, both in terms of time and cost. You can access emergency credit from home, however, it's usually only a small amount, which doesn't go far. Personally, I tried to avoid using it as much as possible, although the ability to use it when juggling sick children and unable to get to the shop was definitely a lifesaver at times. Across Scotland, single-parent families like mine are disproportionately affected by energy affordability. As sole earners and carers, a greater proportion of their income goes on essential costs like energy. Prepayment meters remain more common among households experiencing financial hardship. And at OPFS, we see this resulting in increasing self-disconnection and energy rationing in order to afford bills. And this is compounded by high debt recovery rates on prepayment meters, leaving families with limited credit after deductions. Access to affordable energy is unequal. And while many households can access mains gas, others, particularly in rural and island communities, depend on liquid petroleum gas, heating oil, or electric heating. These are expensive options, and all too often they fall outside the protections and payment options available to gas customers. At OPFS, we're seeing increasing energy arrears often alongside other priority debts. Even before the latest increase of 13%, the energy price cap, parents were struggling with the cost of energy. Rising costs is causing a huge level of anxiety for families who are worried about how they'll be able to afford escalating bills. We're deeply concerned that single-parent families will be one of the groups hardest hit by rising energy costs. No family should be forced into debt to be able to afford basic necessities such as heating and lighting. We need urgent changes that will make energy affordable for everyone and relieve the burden of energy debt. So we're calling for the UK government to introduce an energy social tariff. This would reduce energy costs for households on low incomes, including single-parent families, or households with unavoidably high energy use for things like medical equipment. We want to see a targeted energy debt relief scheme for low-income households, including single-parent families. This would reduce or write off unsustainable energy arrears and relieve the pressure many experience with deductions on prepayment meters. And it should also be accompanied by proactive support when arrears are first identified to prevent debt from escalating and families being forced onto prepayment meters in the first place. The role of advice in supporting people with rising living costs is essential, as we've already heard today. So we're calling on the Scottish Government to continue to invest in financial inclusion and debt advice. We need sustainable funding for specialist services that help families navigate complex systems. This prevents debt escalating and helps families maximise their income and access debt solutions and support longer-term financial stability. As we continue the transition to net zero, the Scottish Government must ensure it is a just transition by prioritising low-income and single-parent households for home energy efficiency improvements, ensuring that they're not left behind. Energy efficiency measures should be accessible to households across the private and social rented sectors, not just homeowners. We need to ensure that any energy efficiency measures reflect the different energy needs of rural and island communities too. Even through the summer months, energy debt has continued to be one of the most common issues we've supported parents with through our financial inclusion service, and that's before the colder weather has kicked in. I can't help but think back to how I would have managed rising costs just a few short years ago, and the simple answer is I wouldn't. I wouldn't have been able to afford to heat my cold, drafty tenement flat that had single glazing and carpets glued to the floor, with no underlay to provide comfort or warmth. Even back then, I rationed the heating, and we would spend cold winter evenings under duvets to stay warm. The guilt of not being able to provide a warm home for my young children weighed heavily on me then. Now, I'm sure it would be unbearable. In a just and compassionate society, it is unacceptable that people are struggling to pay for essentials. It is unacceptable that families will be freezing this winter in their own homes simply because they can't afford to turn the heating on. It is unacceptable that people are going hungry as they can't afford to either buy or cook food. The alarm is sounding loud and clear, and it's time for action. Thank you. So we're going to move into our Q&A part of this webinar. So thank you. If you have got a question, please do continue to add any questions into the Q&A and to vote for any questions that you want to see us answering as well. I'm going to, as we're getting the questions in the chat. I'm just going to share this evaluation form as well. So if you could just take a wee minute just to fill that in, and then we'll stop sharing the slides while we do the Q&A, just so you can see us more clearly as well. So I'm just going to give you a wee minute to do that as well. And while people are doing that, Molly, do you want to share with us what publications you're going to have coming out soon from Citizens Advice Scotland as well?
Yeah, thanks so much, Caris. So yes, with the price cap being announced next week, we have a quarterly publication called the Energy Brief, and what it is evidence from the previous quarter from across the network of Citizens Advice Bureau and from the Extra Help Unit, and it shows kind of the energy related harms, the advice demand that we're seeing across the network, and also presents our solutions to the issues that we're seeing as well. So if you would like to be added to the mailing list for that, you can just drop me an email. I think Caris can share my details with everybody after the call. So previous editions of the Energy Brief are also available on our website. So if you go to citizensadvice.scotland.org.uk and then go to our publications, and you can find previous editions of the Energy Brief there.
That's great. Thank you, Molly. And yes, I think we will put the link to the evaluation form in chat as well. So yeah, Lauren, who's helping behind the scenes, I'm sure we'll put that in a bit. So I'm going to stop sharing the slides just there. We'll move into our Q&A part of the webinar. So feel free to keep asking your questions in there as well. So we've got our first question come into the Q&A. So it says, I've experienced this with suppliers lately. They're quite adamant on really high amounts of debt repayment plan. So there's an example there of a client on a high repayment plan. The supplier won't agree to go lower. The reason being they haven't acted on the debt in a while, and this is the lowest they can go. Is this something suppliers can do now? And even though it is unaffordable for the client, it will probably leave them with no money for essentials. Samantha, is that something that you're seeing with people coming to us for support?
Yeah, so unfortunately, it certainly is a narrative that we hear quite often when people come to both the Advice Information Service and the Debt Service here at OPFS. I think it just highlights the need for specialist support for people within these kind of situations as well, making sure that you have got an experienced and registered debt advisor available to be able to talk those things through. Certainly our service as well, we look into again the whole circumstances of that family. Unfortunately, quite a lot of the parents that we see have often suffered domestic abuse as well, and we need to take those kind of things into consideration as well. There's specialist supports that can look at different circumstances to be able to help out with those things, but certainly in the kind of first case scenario, our debt advisors at OPFS would be speaking to those companies again, making sure that the correct income and expenditures have been submitted for that family. So both working with the family to understand their incomings and their outgoings, what kind of budgeting support that we can offer on those behalf as well, but just plainly putting it to the electricity and gas companies, there is nothing left here to give. You're going to have a reasonable way to look at this. And then again, certainly if there are other debts within the household as well, having a look at those and looking at what kind of best options are there to be able to manage all debts that are within that household, because unfortunately, certainly with the case at the OPFS anyway, with parents that we see here, energy debt doesn't happen in isolation. There's usually quite a complex picture of finances there, and we want to make sure that everybody is getting as robust a service, as holistic a service as possible. So again, I think just that question just does highlight, please do get in touch with us if you are working with single parents, but for anybody that's experiencing those kind of debt issues, making sure that they're signposted or referred to the right specialist services to make sure that the outcome is as good as it can possibly be.
Thanks, Samantha. Molly, is that something that you're seeing across CAS as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Very similar to picture to what Samantha has outlined there. And again, yeah, I would always say to anybody who's in a situation like that to reach out to your local Citizens Advice Bureau. It can give that person-centred, tailored, support that looks at a whole set of circumstances, get those income and expenditures done. And crucially, it's that kind of listening ear and that support. It can be really, really hard dealing with energy companies when you are in debt. And, let's face it, if somebody's in energy debt, there's a really good chance that they probably also have other debts as well. It can be really, really difficult to manage, but particularly getting in touch with energy suppliers can be really difficult and can be quite sort of harrowing for a lot of people. And just having that helping hand and that person kind of advocating on your behalf can be really, really helpful. But I think, again, just the example that's outlined there, it just goes to show, doesn't it, that ultimately, we can give all the support that we have available to us. But our advisors are not magicians. What that example outlined there of what that person really needs is that debt write-off, and they need support with their energy costs. We need to see those two things working in tandem, because otherwise the problem just gets worse and worse, doesn't it? So it's really kind of, again, it's not incumbent on individuals to be trying to have to kind of manage this system and manage these issues. People are doing the best that they can, and we really need to be seeing action on government.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that link back to the need for that debt write-off system is really key there, isn't it? And also having sufficient incomes for individuals, because we can't out-budget an insufficient income. If people don't have the money, they can't pay. So we need to work alongside that to ensure that everybody has enough to live with dignity and to be able to pay for the essentials as well, don't we? We've got another question here about customers going to advisors first without contacting suppliers first, wondering if there's any reasons why we think this is and what suppliers could be doing better to help people quicker the first time round. Molly, I'll come to you first for that one.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and that is sort of something that we're seeing. I think, as I say, it can be really, really difficult to get in contact with your supplier. I think that across the board, there's issues kind of with being able to contact suppliers. Sometimes phone lines are within working hours. People are having to phone up on the lunch break and they're left on hold for hours on end. If they've emailed things in, they're maybe not getting stored properly. I actually had an experience of this myself recently. I was getting chased for debt that was for my downstairs neighbour, and it took me weeks and weeks to sort it out, despite having sent in all the information and things like that. And I work in energy, so for somebody who has got is facing kind of multiple overlapping challenges, it can be really, really difficult to try and navigate those systems. So we would want to see suppliers making sure that their kind of frontline customer service teams are properly trained to deal with people, and that there's people there in those teams who are properly trained to deal with people who are in vulnerable situations as well. But yeah, this is where the support of the third sector does come in, isn't it? As I say, it's that listening ear, and it's somebody who really is on your side, so it can completely. We see it all the time. People who've had to come to the third sector because they just don't really know where to start. So we do need to see kind of improved practices from suppliers, I would say. But yeah, that support of the third sector is always going to be there.
Thanks, Molly. Samantha, what about you? Have you got anything to add to that of what we could see suppliers doing better?
Yeah, so I think just to kind of echo some of what Molly's kind of said, I think that there is a bit of a kind of, I don't know, like that, where to start, what should I do? And I think, again, just to highlight that stigma and that shame about, actually, I can't believe I got to this place in the first place, even although we've kind of outlined here today, it's a wider societal issue. It's not about that one person. So I think for people to kind of come to us, I don't necessarily even think first either. I think we do often speak to parents where there has been multiple attempts at trying to get something sorted. However, they've not been able to follow through on something because they have been proposed a really high plan that they've agreed to out of pure panic. That they wanted to kind of show that they were willing and trying to pay something back, but actually it's just gotten worse. How do we get this kind of thing sorted? So I think that there are several different reasons why people reach out. I think also just in the case of kind of single parent families as well, there's often quite a lot of multiple issues happening at that one point in time. And for that single parent, you are the person who's solely responsible for doing all those things. So actually, it's such a case of overwhelm, of overstimulation, of panic, of worry, there could be 1,000 different adjectives that I could put to that situation. So it may be something that, yeah, we've tried it, I'll put it in the back burner, but unfortunately it's came up again. I think for suppliers, again, just echoing again what Molly's already kind of said, having people who are specially trained, who have an idea about potentially what some of the barriers are, certainly for single parents, about what it actually means to be a single parent as well, and those kinds of different pressures that may come along with that, and certainly for all different kinds of priority groups within the child poverty structure as well. I think that would be really, really helpful. I think as well, better publication of the support services that suppliers offer, because we know that suppliers do offer quite a lot of generous help for people, but often we see parents come to us and go, oh, I've seen this, I'm going to apply for it, and it's already been exhausted or the deadline's passed. So I think making sure that those initiatives, those schemes, certainly for practitioners, that we are aware of them, but for parents, for people who are accessing those or need to access those kind of supports, that they're given in the first instance, and it's not through maybe the 5th, the 6th, the 7th time that somebody's called or contacted, or where there is now a significant amount of debt. If there's early intervention initiatives, schemes, things like that can be popped in place to highlight the fact that somebody is struggling, that somebody is maybe potentially having an energy debt.
Thanks, Samantha. We've got a question here from Karen, who's highlighting the difficulty for non-custodial parents as well, as they receive no additional income for shared custody of their children, which can exacerbate debt. And so she's asking, is this something that there is any conversation with about energy suppliers about, or has this been recognised as a social policy issue with CAS? So I'll come to you in a second, Molly, to come in on that as well. I think from our perspective at OPFS, what I would say is we've done a lot of research in the last few years into child maintenance and the role that child maintenance plays, both for paying and receiving parents. And what we found through our research is that the current system isn't working for either parent. So that is something that we are currently campaigning on, and making sure that the system works for both and that everybody has enough to live on as well. And I think, again, this goes back to the point of everybody having an adequate income and having enough to live on. And for us, one of the things that we would advocate for is to have a minimum income guarantee that would make sure that everybody is guaranteed enough to live. And a part of that as well is having affordable services, which would include things like energy as well. So making sure that costs are affordable, that public services and essentials are affordable, but also that everybody has enough to live with dignity as well. Molly, is there anything for you at CAS that you're seeing on this?
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself there, Caris. Yeah, I mean, this is sort of speaks to the story that I shared of the dad, Amir, you know, who had his daughter at the weekend and would only use a fan heater when she was visiting him, and had actually asked if he could have his gas meter removed. You know, he was on a 0 hours contract. He had, you know, precarious working hours that was driving him further into debt. I think that's a really good kind of distillation of the example of what you've outlined there, Karen. Yeah, I mean, ultimately it is an issue that we're seeing that, you know, we do see across the network. And yeah, I would reiterate our call for a minimum income guarantee, of which a social tariff for energy is part of that, but also incomes for everybody that is enough to live on. In terms of conversations with energy suppliers around that, I would say again that, you know, it goes back to that point about energy suppliers having staff that's properly trained to understand people's circumstances and to understand what it is like for people who have overlapping pressures and multiple challenges, people who are in debt and the reasons why they're in debt. and to be able to support that person in a way that's kind of compassionate and is genuinely gonna help. I think we do need to see more of that. So yeah, it is absolutely something we're seeing, but I think ultimately the issues lie in, you know, in making energy more affordable and making sure that everybody's got enough of an income to live on, and ultimately that's how we stop energy debt from happening in the first place. It's tackling it before it happens, you know, by making energy affordable.
Absolutely. There's lots of questions coming in now. We will get through as many as we can in the time that we have, but I'm sorry if we don't get to your question because we've only got a few minutes left, but we'll get through as many as we can today. So the next question is from Ralph. So Ralph is asking, whilst pushing for big systems change at UK government level, are there things we can ask of the Scottish Government now? So things like changes or improvements or extensions of things like the Scottish Welfare Fund, winter heating payment, and what are the experiences of single parents in accessing these or not? So I think let's go to you first, Samantha, on that kind of question of what are the experiences of single parents in accessing some of those supports.
Yeah, so I think it's probably quite a bit of a mixed bag when it comes to access and supports at different kind of levels. Again, for people who are accessing our advice and information service, and again certainly our debt service as well, the first thing for us is about making sure that those benefit checks are done. I can't underestimate or overstate how important that is for families who are coming to us. We just want to make sure that everybody in the first instance is having a bit of an idea about what's my entitlement. Is there anything that I'm potentially missing? We know that situations and circumstances do change quite often. And just to kind of go back to one of the previous questions, again, that offer is there for people who are not the main carer either, but who are still in contact with their children as well. We work with contact parents as well as main carer single parents too, because at the heart of that, we want to make sure that the children within that family are as well supported as they possibly can be. Again, I think a bit of that kind of advertisement, it depends on how well things are actually put out to different kinds of groups about where people are accessing that information. And again, we spoke earlier about some digital exclusion barriers that we're seeing. A lot of applications, a lot of information is now online. For some people, that isn't something that they can access easily. So again, we're trying to make sure that, certainly at OPFS, we try to make sure to meet people where they are, to meet people within the circumstances that they are, and to make sure that we're as accessible as possible. And I think it is just about, if there are those kind of initiatives, making sure that that is the case for people. But certainly, yeah, I mean, again, a bit of a kind of mixed bag. You can never quite guarantee, like for example, if you're taking warm home discounts, we know that those vary year to year, they vary by supplier. There's a core group of people that get some of those kind of helps and services automatically, but certainly for some single parents that we see, it's a bit of a kind of race against time to make sure that your application's in before it becomes oversubscribed, or certainly before that deadline closes. So yeah, it can be really difficult, but I would say that certainly where possible, make sure that if you are supporting a single parent family, get in touch with the right services at the right time. They'll support you in making sure that all those bases are covered, and if there are any particular supports that are there and available, that they're put in touch with those kind of things. And again, certainly for anybody with a single parent inquiry, question, concern, our advice and information helpline is available there to be able to kind of talk that through and get some specialist advice and information.
Thanks, Samantha. Molly, what are some of the things that you'd like to see the Scottish Government do in this area as well?
Yes, I think, yeah, just to reiterate what Samantha has said, obviously the importance of getting, you know, your income max and your benefit checks done to make sure that you're absolutely getting the support that is on offer that you're entitled to. So essential. I think that, you know, we saw changes to the warm home discount earlier this year. That means like a lot more people in Scotland are going to get it automatically without having to apply for it. You know, that's great. And things like the winter heating payment, you know, these are all helpful things, but ultimately it's kind of a piecemeal approach to a really huge systemic issue. So, you know, yes, while it's that's, you know, within Westminster's control rather than the Scottish Government, what I would say is we do need to see that introduction of the long-term permanent measures of a social tariff that is like a unit rate discount, so that rather than getting kind of a chunk of money, it means that people get that discount kind of at source. And I think that, you know, the Scottish Government released that modelling for a social tariff for energy towards the end of last year, and we'd really urge them to be using that and influencing the UK government to act. And I think also as well is, you know, what we've all kind of touched on today is that issue of not just kind of energy bills, but the importance of energy efficient housing as well. And so, you know, high costs are absolutely an incredibly significant driver of fuel poverty and energy related hardship. There's other pieces of that puzzle, isn't there? And I think that it's within the Scottish Government's power improving the energy efficiency of Scotland's homes with that strategy rooted in taking the local expertise of communities, and local advice services pivotal to that, to make sure that we've got schemes for retrofitting and improving the energy efficiency of Scotland's homes that are kind of designed within communities for communities that take into account the needs of each home, each person, each community as well. So yeah, while the kind of, you know, high cost is that kind of huge driver, there is, and that sits obviously with Westminster, there are things that the Scottish Government could be doing as well.
Yeah, thanks, Molly. I think we'll kind of combine two questions together for our last one, and we'll try and keep our answers as concise as we can for complex issues as well. But Leonie has shared some of her experience here with accessing oil that now companies are not willing to deliver without proof of ability to pay, and that they're limiting how much you can order in one go as well. So the kind of, I guess the question is that something we're seeing more of, and what can we do about that? And how can we ensure that we have a more joined up approach as well, I guess, across advice, so that people can find the support that we need? That was another question that kind of came in there as well. So Molly, I'll come to you first, if that's okay, and then Samantha, if you want to come in after.
Yeah, thanks, Leonie, for the question. Yeah, heat and oil has been a really, a really significant issue for what we've seen in rural cabs. As I sort of said in my speech there, it was kind of immediate with that spike in prices. People protected by the price cap obviously felt it kind of since the 1st of July, but for people who are relying on heat and oil, it was immediate, and we did see some real harms there. People getting orders cancelled, people not being able to get quotes. Instances of people getting their tank filled up and then being told the price afterwards, and then there's debt there. So you know, a really difficult situation for a lot of people. I think as well, an advisor told me that for a lot of people that she's supporting who've been on a social security only income, they were actually unaffected by this, and the reason for that was because they had never topped up their tank. They had never, you know, the spike, that huge spike in costs from sort of the end of February, start of March, didn't affect them because they had simply never topped up their tank, because they just didn't have that upfront payment even before those huge spikes. So yeah, we need to be seeing support for people who are reliant on heat and oil, and I think that long term, what that looks like is supporting people to get different heating systems, to upgrade their heating systems, and that's where we come back to the role of the Scottish Government in making sure that we've got those schemes that are accessible and suitable for the people's needs in each circumstance, for off-grid communities as well as those in city areas. In terms of your point, Jamie, there about what can we do to kind of join up services and ensure that we maximise help for people. What you get from a Citizens Advice Bureau is that kind of holistic, tailored, like wraparound support, not just kind of from the advisors and the specialists that you have there at Bureau, but with that wealth of kind of like local and national partnerships as well. So can't reiterate enough for people, if you are struggling, do get in touch with your CAB. But I think that, yeah, events like this are really important. So thank you again to One Parent Family Scotland for putting this on, because these are opportunities to bring us all together and share those experiences, and hopefully kind of foster those partnerships going forward as well, and keep thinking about what we can do to kind of better improve the experiences of people and make sure that people have that smooth journey when they're accessing support, so that they can get their kind of whole needs taken care of in a smoother way as possible. And that's why, of course, you know, funding for the advice sector on a sustainable basis is so important, isn't it?
Absolutely. Thank you, Molly. I was over optimistic in thinking I would get to 2 of you before we ran out of time. Sorry, Samantha. But I would just echo what Molly has said as well in that answer. And yeah, we take the same approach at One Parent Family Scotland of providing that holistic and wraparound support for families when they access when they come to us for support as well. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. I'm sorry we weren't able to get through all of the questions that you put into the chat. Thank you so much for those of you who did join in with the questions as well. A big thank you to Samantha and Molly for coming along and for sharing their expertise and time today as well. We have published our impact report on energy as well, so we can either put the link in the chat or that will be sent out to you afterwards if you want to see the kind of written summary of what we found in our evidence over the last little while. Our next webinar will be taking place during Challenge Poverty Week, where we'll be looking at the role of a minimum income guarantee in tackling child poverty. So we'll get a link out for that to you as soon as possible. But thank you so much for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of your day. We'll get the links and the recording out to you as soon as possible. Thank you, everybody.